Hey, what's up? David Wood here for theblendmode.com and welcome to another very exciting graphic design tutorial. In today's tutorial, we are going to look at three different techniques that we can use to create lightning inside of Gimp, going from an easy technique to a more advanced technique. Now, lightning has been done before, there are many tutorials on it, and one of the techniques that I show you is from those tutorials, but hopefully I can help you guys learn a little bit more about it, because a lot of the tutorials that cover this method are overdone and they show the exact same thing and don't give you anything new to learn. So I'm going to try to change that. Now, this tutorial is a precursor to an upcoming tutorial that I've had in the works for a while, and that is a logo inspired by the TV show The Flash. If you haven't seen The Flash, I recommend you check it out. It's pretty fun. This is the title image that I came up with, and it's got this lightning bolt look through it. And I wanted to show you how to do this in this tutorial rather than that tutorial so that I can cover more of the advanced techniques and take my time with it instead of feeling like I have to rush to move on with the actual logo design. So stay tuned for that tutorial. It should be out sometime next week if all goes according to plan. Let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial though. Let's look at real lightning. Now, lightning follows very few rules, but there are a couple things we want to keep in mind when we are making our lightning. So here you can see I've got Google Images looking up lightning nature, and most of these are pretty consistent with the way that you expect lightning to look. You've got a main bolt that goes through here, and then you've got some branching or forking going on that goes in different directions and stuff, and usually it's accompanied by a nice glow. And this is the natural way that lightning looks, and we're going to try and keep our lightning looking as natural as possible. Another thing that we are going to look at is also using force lightning. Now, force lightning is the second most requested Star Wars effect after the lightsaber, so I'm not going to cover exactly how to make it, but a couple of guidelines that you can follow when you are making it. So let's look at a couple examples of bad force lightning, just so we can see what we're trying to avoid. Now, this is probably the worst one that comes to mind. We see this kid has his hand out, and he's got this really strange lightning effect going on that doesn't look good at all. First of all, he's got basically one core that's going out, and then it immediately branches off and spreads around, and it doesn't look like force lightning. It looks more like natural lightning that you would see in the sky with all of the different branches and strands going every which way. I mean, he doesn't even have this coming off of different fingers. It looks like it's all coming off one finger. So we're going to try to avoid that. And then this example right here, this is better. Here we can see that there are cores coming off of multiple fingers, and it looks better, but it's not very good because the cores are very dull. They're not bright like you expect lightning to be, and they don't have much of a glow. So those are two things that we're going to try to avoid in this tutorial. Now, before I jump into that, let me just show you a good example and a bad example of lightning on what you want to avoid when you're actually making the lightning. So these are two quick images that I put together. This is a good example. You see this guy holding his hand out, and the lightning is going in one direction. Not the band, but the actual direction. And this is what you want to try to do when you're doing any kind of lightning effect. You want to avoid doing this with it, where it looks like it's coming at the camera. Now, you can fake it a little bit. You can do kind of like an angled shot, and you can get away with using the perspective tool and stuff like that, but you really want to avoid head-on shots like this. Lightning looks best when it's going in your composition from left to right or up and down. You really want to avoid this because it will look pretty bad because of the perspective that I had to apply to make it look small down by his hand and then larger at the bottom of the picture. So as best you can, avoid doing straight-on shots. Angled shots can be good, such as in this case with Count Dooku. So it can be done, but you have to be careful with it. You don't want it to look stretched or warped or skewed. So that's a bad example. That is a good example. So let's go ahead and jump right into the first technique that we're going to use, and that is using stock images and brushes. Now, a lot of people cringe when they hear the word stock images used, especially people that use Gimp, because they like to try to create all of their effects within the program. And you can create lightning inside of Gimp. In some cases, though, it is easier to use brushes or stock images if you can't get the lightning to look the way that you want it. So I'm not going to cover using brushes, that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to talk about using stock images and how to make them usable to work with another image. So for this, I'm going to choose this lightning stock right here. And when you're going through and finding stock images, you want to make sure that you check the usage rights that people put in their descriptions or any requirements that they have before you can actually use the stock, because you don't want to get in trouble with them later, and it's just a nice thing to do to have permission to use their work. Most of the time they'll ask you to link back to whatever you created, or they'll ask you to put a link in your description of whatever you created back to the stock image. So I'm not going to worry about the high-res version, I'm just going to copy the low-quality version and bring this into Gimp. And I want to get only this lightning. I want to cut out the background as much as possible. So I'm just going to grab the free select tool and just draw a rough shape around this lightning. Just like that. And then I will invert the selection and fill it with black. So that way we only see this. And then select none. So now we have the lightning pretty much soloed. This is really easy from here. All we have to do is go to Colors, Desaturate, and check which of these options works best for you. You want to get the best contrast out of the picture. So lightness, it doesn't have a lot of contrast. Luminosity has better contrast, and average has less. So we'll go with luminosity in this case, and hit OK. And then we'll just go to Colors, Levels, and we're just going to grab the gray slider, push that to the right, and just like that you can see what it did. It took out all of those light areas and left us with just this white stroke. We might grab the black slider and just push that over a little bit, and then grab the white slider and push that back just to brighten up the lightning itself. That looks pretty good. So kind of like that. And that on its own you can use. You can then copy it, and then you can paste it into a new image and set the blend mode on screen, and then you can go about setting up your glows and stuff. Now while I'm on the topic of glows, let's just cover that real quick. Glows you do very similar to lightsabers. So if you have your Layers tab open, if you don't have that open, you can find it under Windows, Dockable Dialogues, Layers. We can see here is our original image, and we can hit the duplicate button, set the blend mode to screen, and then we can duplicate this 2 more times. Now we select the second layer and go to Filters, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and with each new layer we're going to increase the amount of Gaussian blur. The initial blur on this we're going to set to 10. Then we'll go to the next one, bring Gaussian blur up again. We'll set this one to around 30. And this final top one, this one we will set to 60. Around 60, 70, something like that. So that added a nice overall glow to our lightning bolt. And once you have all of the glows done, you just right click and choose Merge Visible Layers or Flatten Image. And then from there you can go and color it with color balance or colorize or levels or curves. I like to use curves because it gives you the greatest control over how this actually ends up looking. So that's how you do glows. Now that you guys know how to do the glows, let's talk about branches and forks. Those are pretty easy to do as well. All you have to do is grab your smudge tool, choose an appropriate size brush, usually the smaller the better, make sure that the size is set correctly, zoom into your image, and change the rate to somewhere in the 90s. So usually around 95 to 97 works best. And all you have to do is grab a white section of the lightning and just drag it out and freehand, and it will create a new fork of lightning. And adjusting the rate up or down, if you put it higher, then you can bring out longer strokes. And then once you have those branches, you can go with an even smaller brush and then stroke off of that. And you can do that as complicated as you want. I'm not going to focus too much more on that. That's basically all you have to do if you want to get a nice looking branch or fork off of a single lightning bolt. So that covers the first method of this tutorial. Very simple, using stock images or brushes. It's not cheating. It is okay to do, and in some cases it makes your art look more professional and more well edited. So let's move on to the second method, which is the most commonly used method. So I'm just going to create a default image, 640 by 400, and I'm going to select my blend tool, or the gradient tool, and I'm going to make sure that my colors are black and white, and if they're not, click the little icon right here and that will fix that. And if everything is the default value in the blend settings, we can go ahead and stroke a path. Now this is what a lot of people will do when they create this tutorial, is they'll make a very wide stroke across an image like this with a big gray area in the middle. And then you go to Filters, Render, Clouds, Difference Clouds. And in here, check the randomize button so you're always getting a different seed. Bring the detail up a little bit. And then you can play with the X and Y size to however you like and figure out what you think looks best. And hit OK. Now you can already kind of see what this did. These really dark black areas, that is where the lightning bolt is going to be. So if we just invert the color and bring up our levels or our curves and darken this up by sliding the black slider over, you can see what that did. It gave us this lightning bolt that goes crazy, and then it gave us some separate lightning bolts in here like this. That's not a very good looking result. We want a little more conformity, because this is going to look terrible if you try to put it into a scene, especially if you're trying to do force lightning. So we're going to back it up to that gradient, and instead of this big wide gradient, we're going to choose a smaller stroke in the middle, because the difference clouds affects this gray area through the middle. So instead we'll grab from about there to about there, and this also works if you do a gradient left to right. I like to do it up and down, but we want a gradient that looks kind of like that in the middle. Now if I just quickly run the difference clouds again, you can see now we've got more of a singular lightning bolt through the middle here, this dark black. So before we apply the difference clouds, and we just have our gradient here, we're going to go to Filters, Distorts, Ripple. And what Ripple does is it adds waves to the image. Now don't get this confused with the Wave plugin. It's backwards, but for some reason the Ripple plugin creates waves, and the Waves plugin creates ripples, as in like dropping a stone into water and having this circular displacement. So don't get the two of them mixed up. Ripple will give us these waves. And we're going to go into our settings, and I'm just going to bump up the amplitude so you can see what is going to happen when we change these settings, and set the orientation from horizontal to vertical. And already you can see what that did. It created these waves up and down in the image. And with that amplitude so high, you can really see what the result looks like. Now we want to make sure that we check the smear options for the edges, because otherwise the image will wrap around, and we don't want that. And we will take the period, and the period controls how wide these waves are. So we're going to bump that up to, let's see, in this case I'm going to use around 170. and lower the amplitude because, like I said, that was just to exaggerate it. I'm going to set that around 20. So we have a nice smooth wave. And I'm going to hit OK. Now if we go back into our filters and choose difference clouds, and I'm just going to change the Y size of mine to make it look a little better, and hit OK. Now you can see that we have a little bit more of a wave to our lightning effect. Okay, so now we can go to our colors and invert it, bring up our levels, we'll push the black slider over, and then we'll push this gray slider over. And we want to get rid of as much of this cloud-like texture around it because it really looks terrible once you start adding the glows. We just want to have a solid core. So we'll push that over, bring that black down more. And if we take this value right here for the white and just lower that a little bit, you can see it thickens that core and makes it brighter. So probably right about there looks pretty good. Maybe a little bit more. And then crush the blacks a little bit more. There we go. And hit OK. Now if you look closely, you'll see that there are some colors that got in here from the levels. So go to Colors, Desaturate. Doesn't matter which option you set in there. And that will just remove those colors. And now we basically have this one single thick core. That looks much better. But how can we make this look even better? Well, to start with, we'll create a new layer. Doesn't matter if it's got a color or transparent. And we'll go to Filters, Render, Clouds, Solid Noise. And solid noise is basically the exact same thing as difference clouds, except it will not create that lightning look. And in here, we want to make sure that our X and Y values are set up so that these clouds appear kind of square. We don't want them to look too long or too short. We want them to have a rather uniform square look to them. That looks pretty good. Hit OK. And you can see what that looks like. Now we don't actually need this on, so we'll just turn that layer off for now. And we'll go back to this layer. And then we'll go to Filters, Map, Displace. So in the Displace options, you can kind of see it's already warping the image a little bit. Let's just set this to 0 for both of these values. And the cloud layer is selected for both of them. Now the X displacement affects it along the X axis, so left and right. And if we turn that up, it will distort it to the left and to the right. And we can also pick a negative value if we want. Now we're not going to place this too high. We're going to keep this value pretty low because we want to focus on the Y displacement, which is the Y axis, so up and down. So around 10 will work, either negative or positive. And that's going to affect it just a little bit. And then the Y displacement, we can set that higher to around 30 or 40, depending on the image. This looks pretty good. I don't like what it does right here. That looks really goofy. So I'm going to try a negative value. Right there it does something really strange. So that's too much. So on this particular lightning bolt, I'm not going to use too much displacement. I'm going to keep it pretty light, just so it doesn't warp it and mess it up. So something like that. And these settings will change depending on the size of your image and the cloud layer that you're using. But in my case, -10 and 5 is going to look okay. And it's just going to warp it just a little bit, not too much, but it will just kind of break it up and make it look more natural and less like the default result that you get from this method. Now that that's done, we could go ahead and add the branching and stuff like that, and basically you are done with this method. So that's it for method number 2. We're now ready to move on to method number 3. Now this is based on a Photoshop tutorial. Very, very cool Photoshop tutorial. You can see the results here. And this tutorial has kind of been buried way back in the internet. but it's still very relevant and it's easy to create in Gimp as well. And I might even turn it into a video tutorial. We'll see how that goes. But for now, let's just get this into Gimp. So I'm going to use this image that we've already got, just delete the cloud layer, and then fill our background with black. Now what we need to just do is select the free select tool, and what we'll do is from left to right, and from left to right we'll click and drag and just do this rough freehand like when we were adding the branches onto the other lightning bolt. Now before we let go, we're going to drag around the outside of the image so that when we connect it back, here we have the crooked line, and then we'll have 3 straight lines for the sides and the bottom of our image. And now we can zoom in here and see how that looks. We see some jagged edges. Looks pretty good, but we're going to make it look even better. Now Gimp has a really cool plugin for the selections called Distort. And what it does is it will actually distort the selection line. So it doesn't distort the selection itself, but it distorts that outer line that makes up the selection. So that's going to be under Select, Distort. And in here we've got a couple different settings. Threshold is basically the same thing as the Shrink and Grow options that you will find under the Select menu. If you make the threshold a smaller value, you're going to grow the selection, and if you make it a higher value, you will shrink the selection. So we're going to leave that alone. We don't have to touch that. Now the spread is how much distortion is actually applied. Now for this, from when I was testing it, this size image, 8 works fine. We don't have to change that at all. The granularity is the actual displacement noise size. So let's just demonstrate that real quick. If I make this smaller, I'm going to put it on 1, and I'm going to uncheck the smooth checkboxes for now, just so you guys can see this, and hit OK. And there you can see what it did. Now it took our straight line, and it distorted it on a very small scale. And that made it very, very jagged, very bumpy, and there's a couple places where we end up with little loops like this and this. And that's way too much for this image. We don't want to do that. So instead, if we go back into our distort options, we're going to put that back on 4 and then recheck these boxes and hit OK. Now it ran it, and if we look at what it looked like before, we can see here's the original, and here it is with that distortion. And you can see it just kind of broke that up a little bit more, changed the shape. That looks pretty good. I might make a little bit of adjustment to that. So I'm going to bring that up again. I'm going to lower the smooth, and I'm going to increase the spread a little bit. And then the threshold, I'm just going to raise that a bit. Hit OK. Alright, this is looking pretty good. Now, let's shake things up a little bit more. Now, for this to work, you need to have the Paths dialog box open. So if you don't have that open, don't panic, I'll show you where it is. You go under Windows, Dockable Dialogs, Paths, and that will open up this window right here. And at the bottom of that dialog box, you'll see this little button that says Selection to Path. And if we hold down the Shift key, it brings up Advanced Options. So if we hold down the Shift button and click on that, it will bring up this window with lots of little sliders and values, and it can look pretty confusing, but don't worry, we only need to change 2 of these sliders. That is the filter % and the filter epsilon. Those are the only 2 we need to worry about. Everything else we can leave alone. Now, exactly what these 2 mean, I don't know, but what I do know is what the result is. And by adjusting the 2 of these, we adjust how closely the path is going to follow our selection here. So the filter epsilon, we will lower that all the way to 5. And the filter %, usually between like 10 and 0.01 is where we want to set this. Now if we set this too low, if I quickly do this, is that sometimes we will end up with points like this right here, which is probably hard for you guys to see. But the path that was created actually loops. And there's another corner where it loops around. And sometimes they can be really, really jagged and out of place. There's another one. So we don't want to set that value too low. It's very important because otherwise you will get these really weird corners and loops that do not look right. So I'm going to undo that and get rid of that path and bring up those options again. So filter percent, we can set that around, let's see, we're going to try 0.07. Hit OK. And then click the little eye to make our path visible. And go ahead and look at that, and that looks pretty good. It follows it pretty good, and we don't see any of those weird edges. So we should be all set for that. So let's go ahead and double click on our path here. And that will change our cursor to the pen tool, or the paths tool. And you'll see these anchor points appear on our image. And these allow us to change this line. So you can move a point around, and you can move these little handles here, and that will affect the angle. So now we have to get rid of these outer lines here. So to do that, we'll come over to this corner and zoom in, double click on our path again, and you'll notice that when I put my cursor over a line, that little square next to the actual arrow turns into a four-sided arrow, showing that you can move it. So you can move the point, as I said already, or you can move the line. And if we hold down Control, that will change it to a plus sign, meaning we can go through and we can add points like this. We don't want to add them, we want to delete them. So hold down Control or Command on Mac, and also Shift, and that will change it to a minus sign. And the minus sign allows us to delete points and delete lines. So I'm going to delete this point right here. And as you can see, this line is still connected. It's just that point that it was attached to is gone. But if we click on the line while holding down Shift and Control, we actually delete that line between the points. So we break that bond. Now if we go through and we delete the points, so that one there, and then go down to the bottom, delete this one, over to the other side, delete this one, and then come back up here and delete this one and this one, and then choose a different tool. Now we just have this line. We don't have it connected all the way around. Now what I'm going to do is go back to our layer. So go back to the Layer tab, and I'm going to select the Paintbrush tool, and I'm going to select a small hard-edged brush. So the last time that I did this, the circle 03 worked. Make sure the size is set correctly. And painting with white, and I'm just going to draw a line next to it just to make sure that the size is correct. That looks pretty good. So now our brush is all set up so that we will have a consistent core size across the lightning. But what if we want one end to fade away like natural lightning does? Let's go back to our pictures of natural lightning and look at it so we can copy the effect better. And you can see that in some of these cases the bolt will shrink as it goes along. And if we want to copy that inside of this, we need to set up the brush dynamics. So with the Paintbrush tab open, sorry but my Paintbrush tab got pulled off of the actual toolbox and I can't put it back when I'm recording. We want to go into the brush dynamics, and the brush dynamics allow us to affect the shape and the size and the color and opacity of the brush, stuff like that, when you click on this icon here. And we're going to choose Fade Tapering. Now if I go back to a larger brush and I stroke so you guys can see what's happening, you can see that where I started, the brush was very small, and then it got larger and it went to the normal size. So we want to reverse this effect so that it starts out normally and then shrinks down. Now underneath the presets there is a drop-down menu, so we'll go ahead and click on that. And this gives us options for the fade. We're going to click the reverse option first, because what this will do is it starts out big and then it will get smaller. And then the fade length, that's measured in pixels. So this comp is 640 pixels wide. But we can't just make this 640 pixels because it's not a straight line, so that adds pixels to it. So instead, we're going to set the length about twice as much, and hopefully that's enough. So I ended up setting it to 1200. So with our paintbrush set up that way, I'm painting with white, we're going to go to Edit, Stroke Path. And in here we want to make sure that instead of stroke line, we stroke with a paint tool, because otherwise we won't be able to use those brush dynamics that we set up. So we're using the paintbrush, make sure that Emulate Brush Dynamics is on, and hit stroke. And hide that path. There we go, that looks pretty good. We've got the line going across, and it ends over here where it should. Just like that. Perfect. So now we will create a new layer, and we will put some solid noise clouds back on this. And I'm going to lower the X and Y size on these and hit OK. Turn that layer off, we don't need to look at it. Go back to the lightning, filters, map, displace. Make sure it's using the cloud layer. And we can leave the settings as they were before, or we can try changing it up. So in this case, I'm going to increase that Y displacement. And we're not using very high values because we want this line to be a smoother line. That looks pretty good. Hit OK. Now this line is basically done. Now if you want to make a bolt that does not fade off on one end, then go and run the stroke path again and choose stroke line. Change the width to however you like it. And then in the line style, make sure the cap style is set to round and hit stroke. That's all you need to do, and you will have a bolt that doesn't fade away. So there you have it, method number 3, which is my favorite, and you're also done with this tutorial. So be sure as you're following along with this tutorial that you experiment with the methods that I've taught you. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's why there's an undo button. And if you guys use any of my tutorials in your own work, send me a link. I like to check out what you guys have done. And before I go, I just want to remind you guys I have a Fiverr account if you guys want graphic design work done and stuff. I haven't really promoted this too much, so here I am promoting it. So that's fiverr.com/DavidWoodFX. You can see 2 of the different gigs that I've got up there currently. I've got more planned. One last thing before I go, make sure that you subscribe to the mailing list on theblendmode.com. That mailing list will email you whenever I release a new tutorial or a new project file, so you won't miss anything. You also get tutorials a week in advance compared to YouTube subscribers. So that is all I have to say. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and had fun with it. My name is David Wood for theblendmode.com. Don't forget to check out the Flash tutorial when that comes out next week, and I will see you guys next time.